Okay, so Lab 8 is actually one of the easier labs of the term because we did a lot of the work in Lab 7. So a little bit front loaded. But the nice thing is realistically, if your Lab 7 worked properly, this is a great, this is a nice, easy lab. If your Lab 7 did not work properly, this is a great opportunity to do some troubleshooting, go back and get it working because this is where um, things kind of come together in a big sense. Because if you remember right, in Lab 7, we wrote that big query to get our prices for all of our items for the different number of days and whether they were active or not and all that kind of stuff. Well, we did the query, but now we're actually going to put it in the price table that we created in the previous lab. So step 1, it says using the query you developed in step 4 of lab 7, add the necessary columns to insert the values directly into the price table. Um, and so basically what you're going to do, and they give you a lot of it. So if you remember right, we had our, you'll have to add a little bit to your query, and they have most of it here for you, right? So um, this step is pretty easy because all you have to do is take and copy this, and then just your select statement usually went right here. And so what you can do is you can actually just make sure your parentheses are right, but you can just copy and paste your uh, lab 7 step 4 right inside of this set of parentheses here, and it should work in theory. You want to make sure that because see, this is you want to make sure your as stuff is right here. So notice this one is just item ID. It doesn't need an as because it's selecting it here. So basically you just want to make sure that whatever is in your select statement is up here. And like we talked about, you may have to add some columns because you'll notice this wants to select like created by. So what I would do is just add a comma down here after your, oh, and it's actually right here. So this kind of tells you what to do. So you'll put your subquery for created by, uh, sys date as creation date, subquery for last updated by, and sys date as last update date. Does that make sense to everybody what we're doing here? And real quick, I guess what we're doing, because we're going to put our select statement here, and this is kind of may seem a little weird. We put our select statement here, and then we have it inside of this. And what this does is it just selects all of our pre-existing columns, but it adds the next val. Notice you might have to put an S1 there because that's probably going to give you a error because it looks like that's missing a 1. So price underscore S1 dot next val. So we're basically taking all the values we came up with. We're going to put them together in this nice list, and at the beginning put the next val so we can get it because we're inserting all these into it. And then we say insert into price. Here's our list of columns. We select all the values here from our query. All right. And then at the end, you run your validation and you should end up with these values. Does anyone have any questions about step 1? Really, it's just about putting your query in here because you've already done the work. You just have to add the created by creation date, last updated by last update date inside here, and then just paste the rest. So it's just a matter of just putting those in there and make sure you adjust that one. All right, no one seems to have any issues with that, so we'll move on. Step 2, we add the not null constraint to the price type column of the price table. Simple enough, and that just means that you don't have any empty price type columns. So this is and I'm not even going to say tricky because it's not that tricky. The step 3 is where we're going to update rental item to put the price in. So we update rental item and we set the price equal to our price dot amount column. So we're actually going to pull the price, and we get all the combinations of days pulled up, right? Because essentially what we're doing is we're saying um, get the number of rental days from rental item. See, so we join it to rental, and then we get the rental item type, which is the number of days, so 1, 3, and 5. And then we check and we say, okay, is the checkout date? And if you remember back from last week's video, we did a lot of this with the start date and end date stuff. And we basically say on the day they checked it out, what was the price? Was it between the price dot start? Which price start date and which price end date was it between? Now, we talked about this a little bit to where this is an issue if p dot end date is null. So it says right here, like the other DML statements, this one contains a couple of errors. You need to fix it before completing this step, and you can find the missing components in the diagnostic query below the update statement. So I'm going to point out that p.enddate is probably, because p.enddate can be null for a lot of things. But then he gives you a hint that says you can find all the components you need. So it might look something like this. And if you remember right, the null value statement, if p.enddate is null, it returns whatever's the next parameter. And in this case, it returns tomorrow. So there's a little hint. I'm not going to give it too much away because that's really the biggest step of the lab. All right, but one thing I want to talk about is after you do that and you run this validation statement is really nice because you should end up with the following. So the query should return the following data set. If it doesn't, you've made a mistake in one or prior steps. Now this can go all the way back to lab 6 because that's where we inserted the potters. So this is a really nice step. If you get everything here, great. But this is a really nice step to make sure everything's set for the future labs because believe it or not, if you've made it to this point, you are really over the hump of this course. It actually gets quite easy from this point on. We introduce a lot less concepts, but we want to make sure everything's set because if you're right here, things are going to go smooth. And the nice thing is he gives you a lot of really good problem solving steps here. So it says if you didn't get the results above, you may have an error in several places. So these are things that you might want to check. So you inserted the records into the member contact address, street address, and telephone tables, right? So that means, are you seated properly? And then did the potters get inserted right? That you inserted records into the rental and rental item tables. And that's lab 6 stuff, both of those. Make sure you inserted the proper rentals for the potters and make sure you got all their info in. And then the last one, you obviously want to make sure all your data is in the price table, which is, step 1. So if you need some help finding out, because that kind of gives you things to look for, but then he also gives you some queries to make sure to kind of help pinpoint, which one of these things is it. So you can run these. So it says you can verify the correct customers are configured with the following query. So if you have an error, so you don't need to run these if you get this output. So if you have this from step 3, you can skip the detailed problem solving. But if you have an issue, you can use these to find them. So if you run this and this doesn't match, then you know it's something to do with your contact address, telephone inserts, that kind of stuff. If you run this and you don't get this, that means that you have an issue with your rental items. And then the same thing for your price stuff to make sure your price, everything's working right there. And then this query, so this says the most common error occurs when you insert the wrong start date in the price table. And this will help you see an error. Now, a lot of people run this and they don't get what's down here and they think that their stuff's broken. But this only pulls records that have a bad start date. So if you run this and you get nothing, that's good. So it says you made a mistake if the start date occurs after the rental start date, like the following rows. So you want to make sure that everything's good. And for most people, you don't ever have to even go into this detailed problem solving. But if you need to, they're there. All right, and then step 4 is add a not null constraint to the rental item price column of the rental item table, which we've done that before quite a bit. So, yeah, it's actually a fairly simple lab. Does anyone have any questions? And it looks like Michael, it says you're a few rows short. Which query are you a few rows short on? Is it on this one here? The main one for step 3? All right. And are you the potters? Are the potters the ones that are short? Oh, so you only have one Harry. So if you only have one Harry, check and make sure, because in lab 6 you're supposed to give him two rental, what is it? I can't remember if it's 2 rental items.
So I actually would check my rental items. I do have the number of things there, so I'm thinking it's a start date thing. I just need to. I'm just going through the detailed.
Yeah, you're supposed to give him 2
validations.
rentals. So make sure that in lab 6 you have 2 rentals for Harry.
I should.
And you'll be able to check that with in the detailed problem solving. The second query down will find that for you, because it'll pull all the people with their rentals, and you should have 2 Harrys there. If not, it's pretty simple fix. Go into your lab 6 and just copy his rental item inserts. Do that twice, but you want to make sure that his second rental. Let's go look.
I'm checking the most
There's a
common error
little
right now.
special thing with his rental.
Brother Cook, can you not hear us? I don't think.
All right, let's see. You have to unmute yourself. Everyone's muted by default, and if you are talking, then no, I can't hear. And let's see.
So yeah, can anyone else hear me in
Oh,
the
never
call?
mind. I can't see you talking. Let me real quick
I can hear
check
you.
my
Can you
mic
hear me?
settings real quick.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Make sure it's using that.
So it's probably why he didn't notice anybody asked the first question on step 1.
Yeah.
Let's see. He's checking his values, and we'll see when he's here with us.
Oh, now I can. For some reason, if I just hit test, it worked.
So you can hear us now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
All right. That makes sense why you didn't hear whoever says, yeah, they had a question on step 1. So.
Oh, gotcha. But were you able to check your Harry?
I'm checking the very last one right now. Everything else is looking perfect. I'm just checking the last one where it says the most common error. So.
Gotcha.
And I get 3 rows there. So I got the Harry, the second Harry, the Ginny, and the Lily Potter movie. So it's probably that start date thing.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
These queries that we have to verify and to check all of our work, when we're done with this class, are we supposed to be able to write those?
No. Nope.
Okay.
No, yeah, those are just there to help us and you to check everything.
Okay.
And yeah, there's a lot of complex stuff in there just to make it easier.
Yeah, and I'm concerned because I got all mixed up on the logic for this last lab and then this lab, the beginning. So I don't understand the logic at all in those dates. I've tried to figure it out. So if that's beyond where we're going, then that's fine. I will do some more searching, but I'm getting very confused at this point. But
Yeah, and we can, if you want, we can talk a little bit about it because we got time. And I guess just real quick, did you watch the week 7 video by
Yes.
chance?
I watched yours from this semester, and I watched the one from previous, and I have it all in, and it's perfect, but I don't get it.
Okay. And I'm guessing because you said something about the dates. And so I'm
Or when
guessing
yeah,
like with the case statement stuff, is that where you're getting
yeah.
confused?
I get case statements. I love them because they're so straightforward. But
Right.
I'm not getting and so I feel bad that I'm causing everyone to go slow. But I just don't understand when we went through what they actually mean.
Gotcha. So, yeah, and that's a great question. And I think it's because yeah, it is a little confusing because you know, and a lot of times we're using variables, and so I think that adds like this like layer of complexity a little bit.
You mean like
Um,
are created by or whatever like
yeah,
that? And yeah, I get those. I just for some reason it just doesn't make any sense.
yeah. So basically, and I know let's
So
see.
let's see if I can.
Let me see if I can pull up my. I'm gonna just pull a real quick section out of it.
Okay.
All right, so this is the first part of one of the case statements. And so like, because I like to just kind of look at everything piece by piece. One of the things that I really
Okay.
like about SQL is the fact that you can really break it down. So this is the part where we're trying to determine what value we want to use for start date. And so basically what we're doing here is you said you got case statements.
Right.
So we're performing some logic, and what we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, if today minus release date. So basically what we're saying is the difference between today and the release date less than or equal to 30.
Okay.
And you know, and that kind of gets confusing, like I said, but whenever you see minus, you know, you can think difference, right? And
Right.
so that's the way I kind of like to read that. So is the difference between today and the release date of the movie less than 30 days old? And that's kind of where I'm guessing a lot of your loss comes from is actually the business logic, because the business logic plus the code gets really complicated in this step. So the reason why we're checking to see that it's less than or equal to 30 days is because if it meets that criteria, then it is a new movie. So like for example, a movie that just came out,
Okay.
I just watched one. What was it called? Ford versus Ferrari. You know, just came out probably like a week ago. And so its release date was, you know, 1 week
Right.
from today, which means that it's less than or equal to 30 days. So that's where that criteria comes in. And then, but the other thing we also check for is if it is older than 30 days, the movie, but its active flag is no. And the reason why that also meets a new movie criteria is because it's essentially a deprecated record of when the movie was new. So for example, Hunt for the Red October is definitely older than 30 days. However, in our database, we want to store those historical records, the records that are no longer active. And given our logic, we can assume that if the movie is greater than 30 days old and the active flag is no, then they are those inactive records from when the movie was new. Um, And so that's kind of the logic we're playing on. And so given those two facts,
Oh,
basically we're checking to see if it's an active new movie or the historical active movie prices for an old movie. Then
that
we
was
use,
once new.
yep, that was once new, exactly, because we want those prices from when they were new. And so in that case, when we're dealing with the start dates, we put the release date of the movie because, you can't rent a movie before it's released. But the
Right.
first day you can rent a movie is the release date because we're assuming that, our video store gets them on release day. Otherwise, if it's any sort of an old pricing, it starts 31 days after the release of the movie because that's when we switch the prices from a new price to the old price.
Okay.
Does that make sense a little bit? Does that help?
It does make more sense. So that first section is just saying, this is the new movie prices. One is right now when it's new because it's new, and the
Yep.
other one is it's new because it was old a long time ago, and we're keeping track of those.
Yep. Basically, we're trying to determine what date did we start charging this price. And
Okay.
so essentially we're saying, look, if it was a new movie, we started on the day it was released.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we started 31 days after, and then we're going to charge the old movie prices.
Okay.
And then we really kind of do the same thing with the end date. The only difference is that on an old movie, we actually don't have an end date because we charge old movie prices forever because we're assuming that we never quit renting a movie.
Okay.
So in this, we basically just look to check if it's a new movie. So we almost do the same thing. We say, look, if it's an old movie and the active flag is no, then we charged the new movie prices up until 30 days after it was released. For new movies, we actually don't worry about putting an end date on those because this script is going to run every night and it will automatically change the prices when it comes
Okay.
their time.
Okay.
So there's the start and end date.
Okay. So that makes more sense to me. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Did you want to go over the price ones at all?
If we could, just the first one maybe or something.
Yep. So on the price ones, we're going to do the same thing, but in this case, we're going to do a little less or. We're going to split out the or statements because we're going to end up with we have two different pricings. We have the 1, 3, and 5 for old movies, and then we have the 3, 10, and 15.
Right.
And I think you could actually write this with only one, but I think it helps to break it out just a little bit. So the first one we're going to say, look, if it's a new movie, right? Because if it's less than or equal to 30 days old, then it's a new movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we charge $3, $10, and $15 respective for the number of rental days. If it's an old movie, but they're historical records because the active flag is no, then we also charge $3, $10, and $15. And that takes care of our new movies and our historical new movies. And then so everything else is an old movie. So otherwise we just charge 1, 3, and 5.
Okay, so the historical one is mainly just for if we were going back in our database to find out when how much we earned on the Hunt for Red October.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Because let's say we're going back in time and let's say we wanted to say, oh, how much money let's say we want to do a comparison, right, between Hunt for the Red October and Ford versus Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
When we say, okay, in the first week of us renting that movie when it came out, how much money did we make? Well, if we
Okay.
didn't have these historical records, we couldn't compare apples to apples, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Perfect. Yep. No problem. All right. And you said someone said they had a question on step 1. Did someone have a question on step 1? Okay. Did anyone else have any questions about Lab 8 before we move on to other things?
So in the query where we have to get the system user created by just anyone in the system, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, just anyone you want. I usually use the default one, the sysadmin one. So I think depending on your database, he's either like 1 or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
And we want to put a query in there, not just a 1, right?
Yes, that's best practice.
Okay. Okay.
Technically, a 1 would work, but best practice is to put a subquery just in case they ever change, for whatever reason.
Right. Okay.
Yep, good questions. And the nice thing is you should actually already have the subquery from when you insert it into like contact and stuff like that. So you can actually just go and take that same exact subquery and just paste it twice for last updated by and created by.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. If you have a question about Lab 8 that comes up again, just let me know. Otherwise, we will talk about some of this other stuff because there were some good questions. So the question was, in a real work environment, do you work in a virtual machine like this or in some other system? And yeah, that's a great question. And it's a kind of a tricky one because the answer is kind of a little bit of both. So in ours, we run this virtual machine and it's actually a full-fledged desktop. And the reason they do that is just to kind of make life a little easier. So we actually have, like we have apps inside of this virtual machine. We can run our own terminal here. We have Google Chrome. We can install stuff. It's just like there's people that actually would run this on their computer as their desktop, just like I'm actually running a Linux distribution on mine. That's what you see. It's the same thing. So this is basically synonymous with Windows, but it just looks a little different. It's because it's Linux. Most of the time, and I'll suspend this so I can run my other one because I only have 16 gigs of RAM. A lot of times what you do though is you actually run your own virtual machines that are just headless is what it's called. And by headless, it means that there's not actually a GUI. So I have this virtual machine that I use for testing a lot. And it's Ubuntu Server 1604, which is a little bit old dated now. But you'll notice that when I launch this, it's actually not going to, it's not going to have like a web browser or anything. It's actually just going to be text-based. And I could just log in here like this. And let's see if I remember the password. Nope. Like I said, I haven't used this in a little bit, but we'll try it here. And maybe I did it like this. Sorry. We'll try just one more because I know it's one of two. Okay, new plan. Well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to, I'm going to show you how to run your own if you want to. And this is actually maybe kind of fun. Basically, what we can do right now is I will show you how to set up your own test environment, which eventually can become production. So real quick, I'll show you, for my production systems, I use DigitalOcean. Is who I kind of host through, because if you want it accessible everywhere, you have to either self-host at your house and do a bunch of setup, or you pay someone who has, hosting. and so I use DigitalOcean, and I guess I'll just put a quick plug in for them. I've had great experience with them because they have these different things. So what I do is I get a compute droplet, and I started off. You can get one for $5 a month. So if you have your own website, you can actually host your own website and do it all for $5 a month, which is actually pretty cheap. And you can do whatever else you want with it because it's just like a server. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you how you would do it. So if you do it with DigitalOcean, you choose your operating system, but we're going to simulate having a hosted one. So my favorite is Ubuntu, and it just works really well for just about everything. So if you go to ubuntu.com, you can go to the Ubuntu server, and I'm going to get the 1804 LTS, which stands for long-term support. And I'm going to download this. And yeah, we'll download it. Should go pretty quick. I'm on fiber here at my house, so actually let's there should be more download options. Alternative downloads, and let's use BitTorrent for the server. So when you see the difference between desktop and server, desktop is actually like the desktop environment. So if you wanted like a browser, a terminal, and stuff like that, you could run that in the same way. We can remove that one because it's seeding off my server here at the house. So the reason I chose BitTorrent is because it will download much faster. You can see that it's going quite a bit faster. And what we'll do is we'll boot up our server, and then we'll set up, because we use Oracle in the class, which is a big reason of why we use a VM. But I will show you how to set up both MySQL and I'll show you how to set up MySQL because it's pretty easy. And then if you want, I actually have a guide on Postgres on my website. Both are fantastic. I prefer Postgres, but it is just a tad more setup initially. So we'll set up MySQL, and then if you want to hang around, what we'll do is I'll actually show you how to set up your own web server in case you ever wanted to host your own website, because it's just one command away. That's the beautiful thing about Linux is we can have a development site set up in almost no time. And what's really cool is we can spin up this virtual machine and then connect to it. So, but while we're waiting on this download, I'll show you kind of what I do, because my DigitalOcean site is set up and I already have it pointed to a domain name. So mine is called meridia.crooktech.com is my DigitalOcean droplet. So when I want to connect to it, I use a tool to basically log in on the back end, because like we said, these don't actually have a graphical user interface. But I can SSH into it using my key, and then I can go root at. So I'm basically logging into the server from the back end. So now I am logged in on my server, and then I can open MySQL, which is my database, like this. And you can see why they don't let you type in here. So now I'm connected to my database, and let's see. Let's show. Actually, you know what? I know I have one. Let's show databases to see what we got on here. There's quite a few of them. Let's use WP IntelliHerd, which stands for WordPress. I'm sure you guys have heard of WordPress before. So now I'm in my WordPress for a website, and I can show tables, and there's my tables. So then I can say like, oh, select everything from WP posts. And there's data. So, and that's just exactly what we're going to do here. So now that this is done downloading, let's spin it up. So, you know what? For the sake of being, well, yeah, let's use VirtualBox. I prefer VirtualBox just because I'm really familiar with the settings. So we're going to build a new file, machine new. We're going to build a new virtual machine. And we're going to call this 18.04 server. The type is Linux, and the type is Ubuntu. Do they have Ubuntu? Yep, right there, 64-bit. And servers can run on almost nothing. If you remember right, our DigitalOcean server only had 1 gig of RAM. So that's exactly what I'm going to give this this server is 1 gig of RAM. And I like to use VMDKs, dynamically allocated. We're going to leave it at 10 gigs. It's only going to use 10 gigs of space because Ubuntu is very lean. It doesn't take hardly anything. So we build up the little virtual machine wrapper for it, and then we come in and just attach our ISO that we just downloaded here. So we can go to downloads and get our just ISO we just downloaded. Mark it as a live CD. Hit OK. And then we can hit start and it will boot up here for us. And we'll just wait for it to finish booting up. So now we're going to install our server. And this is pretty easy. So we're going to select English as our language. Sure. We're going to skip that, leave that. Use an entire disk, use that. Done. Yes, we want to continue. So now we put in our name. So I'm going to put in my name. And this is our server name. So I'm going to call this VM1. And I'm going to pick my username here and a password. Confirm my password. Done. Now we want to make sure we install SSH server so we can connect to it. We could do that later if we wanted, but it just allows you to do it there. And we're going to skip all that for right now. Now, you could install a bunch of stuff right here. But we're not going to because we'll show you how to do it manually. And just like that, we are installing Ubuntu server. We'll have our server running right here in a virtual machine. Now, most of the time, like even at a big commercial level, unless they've actually gotten to where pretty much everyone runs in virtual machines because they're more easily movable, they're expandable, they're manageable versus than actually running on the metal themselves. So usually what you have is you have something like Ubuntu server running on the metal, and then you set up these containers where there's different virtual machines running inside there. So a good example, someone like Google, they probably have a virtual machine, well, smaller. Let's think a little smaller. So a lot of people, what they do, so for example, my school district, we have one giant server computer and we have a virtual machine for our web server. We have a virtual machine for our Active Directory. We have a virtual machine for all of our different services. So that way we can keep them all isolated and we don't have to worry about any like interference. And for security, it's also much more secure because each one of these have their own credentials. And so if someone manages to get into your web server, they can't get into your Active Directory and all that other stuff. So yeah, that's where I say it gets a little tricky because a lot are technically virtual machines, but not in the sense like we are. And I guess while this is, it's doing its updates right now, while it's installing, I will show you how I kind of connect to databases. Because, I mean, you can always connect. You can always connect to stuff manually, like we showed before. But then someone asked, do you have a GUI that you use? And the answer is yes. This is my GUI. It's called dbeaver. And it's really nice because it can connect to pretty much anything that you want it to. And so that's what we'll do real quick once we get our database spun up. There we go. So we're ready. So let's reboot it. And I'm going to go in here real quick into the settings and remove our disk, because you'll notice that it actually says remove the installation medium and then press enter. So we take that CD out that it uses to boot, and then we can reboot, and we should end up with our server. This time we know what the password is. All right. So now I would type in my username. Oh, and it apparently was doing some setup. And my login. So then I'm logged in. So now we can actually do stuff. Now you could choose just to do it here in the virtual machine, but like I said earlier, we are going to simulate having one set up on DigitalOcean. So if you set it up on DigitalOcean, this is actually kind of where you end up. So I'm going to type exit to log out, and I'm going to leave this running. And then here in my own terminal, well, I guess there's one thing we need to do. Let's pull this back open. There it is. Because one thing that I need to do is I need to get its IP address, which I forgot to do. So I can do that by doing ifconfig. And are there people talking? Because I can't hear again. So let me try to fix it again. Okay. Yeah, and if there's a term, just let me know. Yeah, GUI stands for graphical user interface. So like this is a graphical user interface because it's got buttons and you can move your mouse and click on things, versus this, no mouse. It's all text based, command line based, terminal based, however you want to say it. All right, so the one thing that I forgot to check is to make sure that we are connected on our network. Where this says NAT, we actually want this to be a bridged adapter. And the reason we want that to be a bridged adapter is so we can connect to it. So let's do ifconfig here again. And I may have to restart. So let's restart real quick. There we go. So now, because I set that to a bridge, you'll notice that my IP address, and I can't click on it because I don't have a mouse, but it says inet 10.0.0.56. And that is an IP on my network. So if I go ping, which is just a way to check to see if a computer responds over a network, I can ping this computer and it is answering back because it's sending me data back. So now what I can do is I can SSH into that. And the way that you SSH is you go SSH. On Linux anyways, or Mac, you can say SSH, your username, at, and then the host, so 10.0.0.56. And it's going to say, do you want to trust this computer? I say yes, and then I put in my password, and I am connected. So I can just hide this window, and I'm connected here. So now that I'm connected, I can then install things and that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to install MySQL, which is a database. So I'm going to say sudo apt install MySQL. And I'm going to hit tab so I can see the different options I have here. And I'm going to install MySQL Server. Punch in my password, hit yes, and it is installing it. And with only 1 gig of RAM, it's probably just a little bit slower, and I only gave it like 1 core of my CPU. So, all right. So now I'm in MySQL's installed, and now I want to do is create a user for myself. So let's go MySQL-u root. Oh, let's try again. MySQL-u root-p. Now I can't remember what the default password is. There we go. So just so you know, sudo, when you see me type that, that's elevating my privileges. So when I type sudo, it's like me saying, look, make me, you know, in Windows, when you right click and say run as system administrator or run it as administrator, that's essentially what sudo does, but way cooler. And it means as super user do. So as super user, launch MySQL as root, and that elevates our privileges so we can log in. So now what we're going to do is we are going to create a user. So we're going to say grant all privileges on star.star2, and then this is where I can put my name in. And I'm going to do my password as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Super secure, right? So I say grant all privileges on, and this basically means everything, to my user at, and this means I can log in anywhere identified by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I get query OK. So now I have a user. So I can exit. Now, there is one more thing that we need to do. And we need to allow MySQL to listen and connect to us from, actually, I don't even know if we need to do that. Let's try to connect. So now that I'm in dbeaver, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new connection. And I'm going to choose MySQL, obviously, because that's what we just installed. And then I'm going to put in my thing here, 10.0.0.56. We're going to leave database blank. Our username is Tanner Crook. And now I can't remember what I put in my password. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to test our connection here. And there we go. So you'll notice that it says it's not connected. And that's because we need to let MySQL listen on that port. So we go to cd etc. Let's go sudo. We're going to edit a config file. And I believe it's in mysql.conf. Nope. That's the old one. So it's in mysql.conf.d and then mysql.conf. Here it is. And there's lots of guides on there, so you can make it work. Okay, so right here where it says bind address, so it says instead of skip networking, the default is now listen only on localhost, which is more compatible and is not less secure. But what we're going to do is we want it to listen everywhere. So we're going to say, basically it's saying that it can listen on any port. So we're going to save that after we change it. And then we're going to restart MySQL to make the changes take effect. So sudo service MySQL MySQL restart. There we go. Now let's test, and now we're connected. All right, now that we're connected, you'll notice that when we go in here, we can do stuff like this. Let's create a new database, and let's call this student. In our char set, let's use UTF-8. Now we have our new database, and we don't have any tables in there, but because we're using a GUI, so now we could come in here and we could actually just set up a query just like we would. So we could say use student and run that, and then we could say create table test, and we can say test1 is a varchar 30. Let's just do that. A little tiny table, and then we can select everything from test, which we get our column, but no data. So then you can do everything just like we were, just like you normally would. But there are easier ways. So like, let's say that we wanted to create a table. We can actually right click on here, say create new table. And then we can do everything just with a GUI, because, someone asks, how do you do this? And so a lot of times I write them by hand. A lot of times I do them this way. Honestly, it kind of just depends on how ambitious I feel at the time. Sometimes it's faster to write them by hand. Sometimes it's not. So, but let's say we were going to create a person table. So we call it person, and let's have our person ID. And I actually prefer it like this. So that's what we're going to do. And this is going to be an int. It's not going to be it's going to not be null. And because we're in MySQL, we have this auto increment thing here. So we're going to do that. And let's give it first name, varchar 100, not null. And last name, varchar 100, not null. And yeah, let's leave it at that for right now. So then we can hit save. And you'll notice that it actually gives you the code here, because essentially it's doing the same thing. Oh, did I auto increment? Oh, we forgot to do one thing. We forgot to define our key, right? Because we put auto increment. So we got to come here to our constraint and create a new constraint. We got to define our primary key on person ID. So now let's save, persist it, and there we go. So now I should be able to come in here and say select everything from person. And there we go. And the rest is history. As you guys know, you should be getting better at doing all of this stuff. And I'm sure there's questions, and this is far beyond the scope of the class, but I just figured sometimes it's nice, because if you guys ever have any projects you want to start building, this is a great way. For example, if you wanted to, you could very easily, let's put someone in here. So let's edit our table here. So let's insert into person, and we want to insert first name and last name, because our other one's auto increment, so we're not going to worry about those. And let me just put myself in here. And there we go. Let's make sure we commit. And there's our record. So now we're going to take this a next step further because we're going to pretend that we are actually doing something. So the other thing we want to do is we want to install a web server. So if I open up my browser and I go to 10.0.0.56, it tells me it's unable to connect. And that's because my server here is not responding over port 80. Well, I can change that by installing a service that will. So I can install what's called Apache. Sudo apt install Apache 2. And this is what most of your web servers are running. Apache is probably one of the most popular. It's what all of mine use. I use Apache for all my web servers. So now when I come here, I get the Apache 2 Ubuntu default page. So this is my first self-hosted website. Now, obviously, we get a default page, but we want to change that, right? Because we want it to actually be something. So all of your stuff in Ubuntu stored by default's in var www. And then we can go into HTML. And here is our actual file. So I'm going to say remove index.html. And I can't because I need to be sudo. And then I'm going to say sudo nano to make a new file. We're going to call it index.html. And we're going to say HTML. Let's do a head. Let's give it a title. This is where your web development stuff comes in. This is a test CIT225 page. Well, let's call that. And our head statement. And then let's go H1. This is a test CIT225 page. And end our HTML. Tag, save it. And now if I reload this page, there's our website. Anyways, which is pretty fun because then you can do whatever you want from here. You can completely build your website. But what we might do real quick is we might actually build our let's build something that connects to our database so we can use our database just a little bit to connect here. So I'm going to leave that sitting as it is for now. And I'm trying to think if we should use Flask or there's lots of different options. Let's do this. Let's use Flask. Sudo apt. PHP is one of the more popular ones, and it might actually be the fastest. And we need to install PHP. I can't remember what it is. And then, like I said, there's really nice guides. Like there's this one from DigitalOcean that actually walks you through all of it. Nice and slow, you know, gives you all that. Install MySQL, because basically this is called a LAMP stack. So this is actually one of the labs in there. So I'm actually going to just take and copy and paste all this here. That is the command I was looking for. But mcrypt doesn't have one, so we are going to, which we actually don't care about. And away it installs. And so now we have PHP because we'll use PHP. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build our website to where it actually will connect to our thing here. And there's lots of examples just about everywhere about how to do it. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to just take and copy an example here. So we will put this right up here at the top. So here's our little PHP script. And because we are on this local host, we can leave it there. And then we'll put in my database credentials here. So Tanner Crook. And my password was 123456. And it's going to connect there. Now, actually what I should have done is I should have put this. No, let's leave it there. Let's copy and paste this. Well, we can leave it there actually. All right, so now that we're connected, we can execute a query. And the last thing we need to do is we need to close our connection. So let's go. And I rarely use PHP, so I'm a little rusty. All right, so in our PHP, the last thing we want to do is close MySQLi. Close our connection. All right. So now what we're going to do is we are going to run a query, and we're going to print the results out. What we'll do is we'll get our first name out of our database. So we are going to say, we'll make our SQL string. So we're going to do it just like we would normally. We're going to say select first name from person, where person ID is equal to 1. And then we're going to execute that and gather the result. So we say the result is equal to our query there. Real quick, let's get rid of our close tag here. We'll give a line so we know where to start and end. And then we say, and I'm going to take it. We're going to say if the result number of rows is greater than 0. So basically, if we have data, we are going to do something. And we're going to say while the row is equal to the result fetch associate So basically for every row that it returns, we are going to echo, and we are going to echo H2 hello. And let's see. Yeah, let's do echo H2 hello, and then we'll do row. The first name. And then we'll append an exclamation mark and our closing tag. Like that. Okay. Let's see how we did. I can get my window over here. Oh, so we goofed up somewhere because we're escaping our stuff. So let's see. Query, SQL. Right here, we're missing something. Select, we have our closing one. Let's see, where was that off again? Oh, and what we need to do is we need to enable our, so let's leave that right where it is. We need to enable our PHP. Oh, and it looks like it was already enabled. Let me make sure I'm not missing a step here. Oh, and we need to restart Apache, that's why. Sudo service Apache 2 restart. And now let's see if we run our PHP. Nope. Let's try. Oh, and so one more thing, a little pro tip. If you want to be able to run PHP, it's got to be in a PHP file. So let's move index.html to index.php. Otherwise, it reads it as HTML. And there we go. So now we're connected successfully, but for whatever reason, we're just not getting anything out. So let's edit our file here again, our index.php. So we're going to say, oops, else echo no rows returned. And let's try again. So now the problem is that we're not getting any rows returned. And my guess would probably be because we don't have a database set up, which, well, we need to have a database set up because right now we're not pulling from anywhere. So let's add our database. So we want to add one more thing here. So we're going to say DB name, and we're going to set that equal to student because that's what we built our database as right here. So then when we create our connection, we're going to just add one more parameter here. And we're going to say $DB name. Save that. Come back here and execute. And now all of a sudden we have a dynamic web page that is pulling from our database. So let's do this. Let's add someone else. So let's add my wife. Her name is Taylor. So we're going to say insert into person, Taylor Cook. We're going to commit. Now what we'll do is we should get, oh, did I commit? Did that work? Commit. Oh, and we need to change because we had it hard coded to select where person was equal to 1. So let's take away this and run it for everybody. So now we got 2. So everybody that you added would be able to do that. If I had this on a public server, I would let you all connect and I'll put your names in there so you could all say hello. But anyways, we didn't get that far. But now what we can do, are you guys still with me? Are you bored? Is this interesting? Because we can be done or we can keep going down the rat hole. Okay, all in. Okay, so there's a lot of different things we can do here. And just so you know, PHP is an old, I kind of consider it old school in a way, because PHP really isn't all used terribly much anymore. But it is quick and easy. So real quick is as one last little example, before we go, I will show you real quick. Basically what we're going to do is we're actually going to just build a table instead of just saying hello. So if we wanted to build our table, what we could do is we could say, you know, because obviously if we have records, we want to echo the beginning of our table. So we're going to say table. And then we're going to say table row. And let's say person ID. And I'm not formatting this pretty at all, but we get the picture. And then let's say first name and last name. Then end our row. Let's make this bigger so you can see it all. So basically that's just the HTML for my table start and the header row. And what we're going to do now is instead of putting hello here, we are going to change this to a table. We're going to add a table row. And in our first table data, we're going to add our person ID. Oh, and one more thing we need to do, because right now we only select first name. Let's select everything from person. So we're going to come up here. We're going to select that. Change this to a T, D. And now we get to add all of our data elements. So then we're going to get the rows first name. And then the row last name. And our data element, and we end our row. And then when we're all done, we end our table like so. And now when we load our web page, we should get a nice little table. And we could add borders to that, do all that fun stuff, which is really nice and fun. But real quick, what we're going to do is we are going to, just to make our life easier, I'm going to use what's called we're going to add Bootstrap. And if you haven't heard of Bootstrap, it's probably the best thing ever. So let's add all this stuff, which is just going to make our life super, super easy. Because now when we come down here, we can say class equals table bordered. Oh, we need to not mess ourselves up there. And now we get a nice, pretty table. And fun stuff like that. And then you can go from there to where maybe you say you can edit, you can add data and stuff like that. You know, in fact, let's do that. Let's add data. Well, actually, no, we'll save that for another time because we actually want to use Flask for that. Anyways, does that make sense, everybody? Kind of, this is kind of where the end result is, right? So the whole reason why we're putting all this data in here is so we can use it, right? And we build applications so people can put the data in for us. So we're not actually doing it. Real quick though, just real super quick. Let's build, because this is a really excellent concept. Let's build a common lookup table. So we're going to build a new table and we're going to call it common lookup. We're going to create a new column. And we are going to call this common lookup ID. And you know, the classes you take for this stuff, you kind of learn it all along the way, I guess. So there are a couple. I know there's a web development class that you can take. What's it called? Anyways, there's a lot of stuff you can learn, but I think CIT, you know, unfortunately, so this is what we're doing is actually considered full stack development, right? Because what we did, and so that's where full stack comes in. You'll hear the thing a lot, but the nice thing is as a full stack developer, you're really marketable, because what we did is we spun up our own server, right? So that's system administration. We installed Linux on it and set up our own web server. We set up our own database. We building our own database, and then we're also building our own website front end and back end to connect it all. So basically we're doing the whole caboodle. And that's something that they really just like don't do. And that's why, you know, a lot of people have database professions. A lot of people have web development professions, and it takes multiple people. So if you want to do this kind of stuff, I really truly believe the best way is to start dabbling, because hopefully through your education, you're learning little pieces here and there, and then you just got to bring it all together, which is really probably the most complicated part. But the nice thing is there's lots of resources out there to help you do it. So anyways, I digress. Let's keep going. So we have our common lookup ID. We're going to have a table column. And table is a keyword. So we're going to call this a lookup table. Lookup column. Value. And description. Okay, so we have a bunch of stuff there. I'm going to go in here, create our primary key on our lookup ID, hit save and persist, and we have our common lookup table. right? Now, let's say that we wanted to display various credit card types, right? So let's say insert into common lookup, and we're going to insert into the lookup, lookup table, lookup column, the value, and the description. Because I know one of the most things that people get confused over is the common lookup table. But I think it really helps to see why you have one. So let's say the lookup table, when we're going to make something up, right? We're going to say transaction. We're going to pretend we have a transaction table, and we are going to have a credit card type. So we're going to insert those, and we're actually going to insert a couple here. Oh, what did I do here? Scoot over so we can see it. Your lookup table. Oh, right there. There we go. So now we got our 2 rows. And Michael asked a question, and yes, so if you have an issue, just, feel free to resubmit your Lab 7. Technically, I don't know if there's anything in Lab 7 that would be an issue. I'm trying to think. But good practice, if you want to. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to build a way to a drop down, because like when you go to this when you're buying something, you have to choose if it's MasterCard or Visa and that sort of thing. And I'm actually going to pull up a tutorial here. So W3 schools drop down. That's not what I wanted. Drop down list. There we go, select tag. So what we're going to do is we're going to build ourselves a drop down list to do this. So we got our people, right? So before we close our connection to the database, we're going to echo, let's do another HR line to separate. And then we are going to run another query. So we're going to say select is equal to, and we're going to select everything from common lookup. And then we're going to query it con query SQL. So we're just executed our new query. And I'm going to just take and copy this because there's no need to reinvent the wheel. But rather than do a table, we are going to do a drop list. So we're going to say echo select ID is equal to credit card type. And we are kind of hodgepodging this just a little bit, just so you know, which is fine. Okay, we're going to cut this and say echo. What we want to echo is our options. And our value is equal to our row trying to get the formatting of this all right is a challenge and a half. So we're going to say that our value is our common lookup ID, because basically the value is what we're going to return back to the server. We close that tag, and then we want to append our actual option here. So then we're going to say description, because our description is our pretty way to format it. And then we build our option, and then we end our select. So we wrote it. Let's test it. And there you notice we get our Visa and our MasterCard. And really what we would do, and because I did make a goof up, instead of selecting everything from common lookup, we would say select everything from common lookup where lookup table is equal to transaction and lookup column is equal to credit card type. And we're still working, so yep, there we go. That's a real quick example of how we could do that. Now what we could do is we could have a person type, and we could actually put the drop down list inside of stuff to change them and whatnot. So it looks like you guys are talking about which classes. So 327 data warehousing is more about like server administration almost, I believe. No, I'm actually not sure what data warehousing talks about specifically. But it's I don't think it's as much about this stuff, I believe. I think 325 is more of PL SQL, but I remember a class, and part of me is thinking 360 something, 360. There was a web development class that really talked about this kind of stuff a little bit. But anyways, that's some basic stuff. So there's a good example of a drop down list. And you can do a drop down list with our people too. You can do really all sorts of kind of fun stuff. And yeah, and that's with PHP. And PHP, it's just kind of quick. That's why I chose to do that. Normally, I use Python and what's called Flask to do something very similar, but it just takes a little bit more setup initially, but then you can do a lot of stuff with it along the way. But that gives you a sense. And the nice thing is you can really do this, test it all on your home computer if you just spin up your VM. Or like I said, if you wanted to make it accessible, you could use a DigitalOcean droplet and that sort of stuff. You can also self-host at home. So like my website, this is actually hosted at my house. It's running on an old Mac Mini, actually sitting just right behind me. Yep, and web front end and back end is kind of what we're dabbling with here. Front end is like HTML stuff. So, but the back end is really what we were doing. I mean, we did enough front end to be dangerous. But yeah, and eventually you can get to the point where you do all sorts of fun stuff that does a lot of stuff. And I'm working on it. So on my website, db.tannercook.com, I'm actually working on a Postgre tutorial. And along the way, it's not only going to teach you Postgres, but it's also going to dive into Flask, which will be nice for what we're showing here. If you like what you saw here, you would love Flask, because it's pretty incredible, and it uses Python, so things are nice and easy. But so things hopefully will be coming there soon, but I'm just so limited on time that I can only add so much at a time. But anyways, so you can start up your virtual machine if you want, start dabbling around with it. You can build your own stuff. The nice thing is if you script everything, so I created mine in a GUI, right? The nice thing is if you build it in a file, you can move everything really easy and have your tests set up just about anywhere. So yeah, that's one thing I would say. Best practice is to script, because then if you ever lose it, you can always recreate it. And the nice thing is because you're in a virtual machine, when you're done, you can just click this, and I'm even just going to save the virtual machine state. You don't have to. You can just power it right off, and it saves it. But now you'll notice that if I try to do this, it's not going to connect. It's going to fail. Same thing here. If I try to select everything from common lookup, it will run forever because it can't connect because our server is down. So anyways, but that was down quite the rat hole. It's but I also enjoy it because that's actually what I spend a lot of my time doing. So is my day job, I'm just like a DBA, which means I just spend a lot of time doing strictly database stuff, but I also do a lot of stuff on my own with my own business, and that's really what I do. Is exactly what I just showed you, just on a large scale, to something where actually it looks like I have an error on my server. So anyways, to where you do a lot of stuff. So another example is of one that's running software that I built is this, where you can buy, sell, and trade cars. And it is doing kind of exactly what we talked about, just on a much larger scale, right? And don't get discouraged by it, because believe it or not, I started exactly where what I just showed you. Very, very, very simple stuff, and then eventually it can blow up all the way to where you're doing stuff like this, where you have tons and tons of data and all sorts of fun stuff. So yeah. Okay, so it's funny you would mention that. So do I use cross joins at work? And the answer is yes. And if you want a good example, I just put a blog post up last month of a time that I actually had to. So for example, in our SIS, they needed to know how many special ed students there were per year, per school, on given dates for every year, because they wanted to see if they were growing. They wanted to see a trend line of the amount of special ed students that were enrolled. And that changes daily, not deadly. So what I did is I wrote this query and I break it down, but basically what I do is I cross join with these different snapshot dates and years. So I take I get the calendars, the schools, and the enrollments. So I get the different calendars for every school. Then I get all the enrollments, and then I cross join that with the calendar year and the snapshot dates, which is October 15th, March 15th, and May 15th. So basically, I have those dates for every year, for every student, and then I filter it down to where the snapshot date is between the enrollment start and date and end date. So basically, is the student enrolled during that given snapshot date? And if they are, count them. So yeah, there's a real life example of a cross join in practice. And someone asked, so Infinite Campus gives you enough rights to write queries like this? And yes, so most of the time, even though it's like a paid product, it's your data. And while it's not required to know how to do this stuff, I don't know how people survive without knowing how to do this stuff, because you're running a database product that runs on a database. You should use the database. So yeah, and actually, most products, they give you read-write access. So I actually could delete all the data with one command, all in one go. Luckily, we do backups, but that's costly, and I would probably not be in a good place with my job if I did that. But that's why you gotta be super careful. And whenever I test stuff, I always test in a sandbox environment first. But yeah, so it's a great question. But yeah, there's a good example of a cross join. And if you want to read this, I actually go through and discuss like all the little pieces. Obviously, I can't show you the data, but it is there. So if you ever manage Infinite Campus, you can try it out. Good questions. Any other questions? I know we've gone far off the given, but it is all connected. So. All right. Well, we definitely talked about a lot today, and we will do more. So I guess just as a quick little end to this. So how it works is, so we're on week 8 right now. We go into week 9 and we kind of go through this. And then, so actually the last few weeks we really talk about this kind of stuff. So, like week 13 is our LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. That's exactly what we just did. Granted, in the lab, we don't do as much, but I kind of leave week 13 and 14 open to kind of let you guys experiment with what we just did. Because technically, if you wanted to, you could build a whole movie rental system in an actual web application on our database if you really wanted to. So, there's a lot of things you can do, but just as a roadmap, know that we do kind of do this right at the end. So basically the way this class is structured is you learn all about the database stuff. And then at the very end, it's like, oh, and here's why you learned all this, which is sometimes weird because, like databases seem a little boring until you do what we just did. Then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is awesome. Right. And then what's cool is once you get to the point where you can build the web page, you can actually serve applications. So let's say you're really interested in like mobile development, like for iOS and Android, you can actually get data from your web server to pull down. So like, for example, where we were returning it to the page, we could actually build JSON. I'm sure you guys are familiar with JSON. We could build JSON and then return that to our app and then show our people as a list inside of like Swift or our iOS application or Android. So yeah, lots of fun things you can do. The minute you have a database, because the database is really fundamental to any application that is data driven. And even some that aren't data driven, the database is fundamental because it could store things like settings, right? Or maybe you want to be able to change the color of your apps without having to change any of your code. You could make your app pull colors from a database and then change whenever you change the database. So that way you have your app installed on thousands of phones, right? And you want to just change the background color. Well, you come into your dbeaver and you just say update. You could do something like this. You could say update settings, set background color equal to, let's make it white. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, or whatever. You can make it work. But anyways, possibilities are endless, and that's what makes technology so much fun. But anyways, that's where we will call it for the night. I'm sure you guys, that was really information overload. If you want, there are tons of great examples out there on how to do what we just did. You can also watch mine, which really will take you step by step. Granted, it wasn't the most clean and organized one. It will get you going. Worst case scenario, but like I said, there's tons out there. DigitalOcean has actually tons of stuff. So, however you decide to go, you can do it, and it should be great. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll hang around for just a minute. But thank you guys for coming, and thanks for all your questions.